Project is on the comparison of the growth of radish and carrots in aquaponics and soil. His mentor is Robert Ellis.
We humans are a clever and creative bunch. When problems appear, we find the solution and rise above the hardships. Granted that sometimes our solutions that should have been permanent become a bit more should have been temporary, become more permanent, and they have some unpleasant and unintended consequences. Once we realize the issues and accept that they're actual problems, we work to find a solution, be it to solve that one issue or the problem as a whole if we can. Part of the problems that we face today are tied to our interactions with the natural environment. Right now, we're struggling with issues such as nutrient runoff, overfishing, and water usage, to name a few. In response to the difficult situation we have found ourselves in, we've come up with a few good solutions, one of which is aquaponics. Today I'm going to talk about what aquaponics is, the advantages it has over traditional farming, and some of its disadvantages, and how I went about testing one of the reported downsides. The basis for how aquaponics works is the nitrogen cycle. This is when decomposing biological material is converted using bacteria into the more useful form of nitrates. Now this happens naturally in aquatic environments and in soil on land. In aquariums, the buildup of nitrate is a bit of a problem, and this is usually solved with the removal of the wastewater and replaced with cleaner water. In farming, we usually have to add additional nutrients to our soil for the plants in the form of fertilizer in order for them to get all the nutrients they need. So, if aquariums have an issue of nutrients building up, and crops have an issue of needing enough nutrients and water, it seems then that combining the two would be a good idea. And it is. This is aquaponics. So, what really is so great about aquaponics? And why should we work to convert over to aquaponics or traditional farming? And then, what are the downsides? Well, due to the fact that the plants are removing the nutrients, you don't really need to change the water. The only water needed is to replace the water that's lost due to evaporation. So this cuts back on water usage. Also, this cuts back on nutrient runoff because you're not getting rid of the water, it's staying in the system. And as for why large-scale adoption is a good idea, fish is a far more efficient resource to grow the most common domesticated animals. So for this graph, what they're talking about is for every 6.8 pounds of feed we put into a cow, we only get 1 pound of usable meat. For hogs, it's for every 2.9 pounds of feed. Chickens get a bit better for 1.7. And then for farm-raised fish, for every 1.1 pound of food we put in, we get a pound of fish out. Now specifically in this graph, they're talking about farm-raised salmon, but most farm-raised fish stay close to this ratio. And in fact, the most recent US government National Climate Change Assessment report actually highlighted the need for wide-scale adoption of aquaponics. Now, I could keep going on and on about how aquaponics solves environmental issues, but I do have a time limit. So, I'll talk about how aquaponics is not just a solution to environmental issues, it can also help solve some socioeconomic issues we're currently facing. Food deserts. Now, this is a complex issue that can boil down to 3 symptoms. How far someone is away from a source of fresh, healthy food. So even if someone did live right next to a supermarket, well, if they don't have access to a car, they don't really have easy access to the fresh, healthy food. And then, does the supermarket even have fresh, healthy food, or does most of what they have processed and packaged and loaded with fats and sugars? And then lastly, is the food, healthy food, even affordable? If it's not, then those low-income families are going to have to buy that processed, unhealthy foods. And then with the families having to resort to unhealthy foods, or actually really often fast food, it's just adding to our rising obesity rates. So, and the children, the developing children, they're at a disadvantage because they're not getting healthy food. Their health suffers, and even their performance in school suffers. And then with with the detriment to the health, it adds to rising healthcare costs. And it's just a big downward spiral that can all be traced back to just a lack of fresh, healthy food. So a small-scale home aquaponics system can provide access to fresh produce and a very healthy source of protein. Now, however, setting up a home aquaponics system is going to cost a bit of startup funds, which can be an issue for low-income families. Which leads me into the downsides of aquaponics. This is a list of commonly claimed disadvantages to aquaponics, and I would love to stand here and just like go through each one and justify or explain away, but again, I got a time limit. So looking at this list, I decided that difficult to grow root crops was easy enough to test. So to start this experiment, I needed access to an aquaponics system. By sheer coincidence, I've been managing OCC's aquaponics system for the past year and a half. So before I began this experiment, both grow beds were media beds. And what this means that in this case, the plants were sitting in baked clay beads. So in order for me to test different styles of aquaponics, I converted one of the grow beds into a raft system. What I did is I bought just 2-inch thick styrofoam insulation, cut it down to size, and drilled 1.5-inch holes for the plants to sit in. In media beds, the plant's roots have something to grow through, and the bed is flooded and drained of the fish wastewater on regular set intervals. Whereas in the raft system, the roots are free floating and just sitting in the constantly recirculating water. Now as for the plants, I started my radishes and carrots from seeds in what's called rock wool. It's a fibrous absorbent plug that's commonly used for germination and transplanting seeds. After they sprouted, I transplanted an equal set of each into pots filled with the OCC Horticulture's fertilizer mix, the media bed, and then the raft. Pretty early on into the experiment, I could tell that the radishes were not doing so well. In fact, about a month or two in, they all died in the aquaponics. But the carrots were doing fine. On the surface, it seemed. So at the end of the growth period, I harvested all of the plants, got their fresh weight, and then in order to get a more accurate comparison, I dehydrated all the plants for about 8 hours at 100, 110 degrees Fahrenheit. What this does, it removes a lot of the weight that the water was contributing, and it would just leave you the mass of the plants. Now, since only the radishes in the soil actually lived, forgive me, but I didn't bother crunching the numbers. Since the carrots grew in all the mediums, I did actually run the numbers. So as you can see, right there, this is the soil carrots, and there's actual carrots. You can see them. All mediums got 5 carrots. 1 did die. The media ones, only 2 lived, and there's not really much of a carrot there. The left one, there's a carrot. The right one, there's nothing going on there. And then the raft, all 5 lived, but there's not much carrot anywhere there. And so this is the the totals for each group, the averages, and then after I dehydrated them. And so as you can see, the media, what 2 lived, they only grew to about 60% of the total mass the soil did. And the raft, they didn't even get to half of the mass that the soil did. You can very clearly see. So based on these results, we can see that it does seem that aquaponics is at a disadvantage when it comes to root crops. However, there has been a relatively new style of aquaponics that has popped up that is supposedly better for root vegetables, and they're called wicking beds. And the thing that makes wicking beds so promising is that they utilize capillary action to create a more natural growing environment for the root crops. And the results look very promising, as you can see by these carrots that were grown in a wicking bed. And so in future studies, I'd like to set up a wicking bed just like that one over in the horticulture department to better study to see how much of an advantage this does give us over traditional farming. And if we can work to minimize the downsides of aquaponics, it's more likely that wide-scale adoption of aquaponics is going to happen. I recognize that it is very statistically unlikely that a future director of the Department of Agriculture or EPA or FDA is in this room right now. So what can all of you do to help make a future like this come true? Well, you can help to vote through water conservation measures and future bills that will help renovate our current farming techniques. Hopefully in the future, one of those bills will put us on the road to beginning to switch over to aquaponics. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Now, open the floor for questions for presentation.
In aquaponics, is there a preferred ratio of the amount of fish in a system versus the biomass of like the plants in the system?
Well, yes, because you gotta find that sweet spot where the nutrients being produced by the fish are actually being absorbed. That exact ratio, it's hard to say because it all depends on the plants, it all depends on the fish, and so different time, it depends on what you want growing. It does take a lot of experimentation. So far right now in our system, we have, by our recent count, 23 tilapia. They're about that big right now. And our nitrate levels are staying pretty consistent. So we're happy right now in our ration.
Can you do cost comparisons with the aquaponics and the traditional method? I know you mentioned that it's more expensive, but.
Yes, so that is one of the common disadvantages that especially if you're starting up, especially if you're going large scale, is huge. It's a pretty high initial cost. But once it's started, with most systems, the pump is going to be on a timer, so it's not continually running, so it's not continually using electricity. Again, with the water use, you're only adding water to top off, so your water bill isn't going to spike up a lot.
Right, I was wondering if you had like a dollar.
Oh, no,
Right here, like somebody else did, or.
Oh, there have been studies where they've done the cost analysis. A lot of the companies that are trying to sell you on their big aquaponics, they throw numbers around saying, oh, it's cheaper this way. And it is after it gets started. The initial, there's the startup.
Great presentation, a lot of good information here. I think one of the good things that you hear about when you listen to a presentation is they present the problem, then they present, they say the why, then the how, and then the what, typically. And I think one thing that could improve this presentation, you started off with, here are the benefits of aquaponics, here are some unhealthy food, here's the food crisis, and then here's some detriment, and here's some issues with aquaponics. If you would phrase that where you start with, here's the problem, here's the food crisis, the epidemic, and you kind of lead us through, and here's a potential solution, I think everyone kind of gains we'll draw that conclusion in our mind before you even say it. And so it's easy to gain adoption when you work the audience that way, you kind of set up the problem and lead to the solution. So just some advice when you're presenting and you're ordering some of this information, that can often help. But I'm curious, are there some, because you studied carrots, are there certain plants that thrive with aquaponics and some that don't?
Well, yes. Actually, last year's study I did was testing what plants do well, and I tested it with strawberries, basil, peppermint, and jalapeno. And overwhelmingly, jalapeno did amazing in my system. It beat all of the other plants in growth rates. It was it grew 7 times better in the aquaponics versus in potted fertilized soil. And so, yeah, no, a lot of plants do very well. Lettuces do great in aquaponics, particularly in the wrapped systems. Lettuces do really good.
Why did you choose carrots instead of jalapenos then?
Because I'm testing the disadvantage that root crops don't grow well in aquaponics. And so I picked carrots and radishes, commonly grown root crops.
Any other questions?
So one question I had, so what would happen if foreign, more toxic water were to be introduced into the system? Is there a way to like filter it out if it were to happen?
Well, it depends what you mean by toxic. Like if it has really high nitrates, it wouldn't be too much of an issue because we're just adding more nutrients to the system, which would be for the plants. It would be a bit of a shock to the fish, the sudden toxic water, but because the system is constantly being filtered out, and most fish that are farm raised are generally a bit hardier, the fish would be fine, and eventually the nitrates would be taken out and they would all level out after a while.
Thank you.